The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Heavy and unrelenting, it turned the sleepy town of Greystone Hollow into a watercolor painting of shadows and blurred edges. Most stayed indoors, watching from fogged windows as streams overflowed and forest paths vanished under muddy torrents. But Alara moved through the storm like a whisper of defiance, hood pulled low, boots sinking into sodden earth, drawn by something she couldn't name. She wasn't supposed to be out. 16-year-olds weren't supposed to wander alone into flooded woods, especially not after dusk, especially not after the lightning struck the ridge last night, splitting a towering pine and revealing something buried beneath. But rules had never sat comfortably on her shoulders. Not since her mother vanished 3 years ago and left behind only a journal filled with sketches of strange beasts, symbols, and places that didn't appear on any map. Tonight felt different. The air pulsed with a tension she couldn't shake, like the world was holding its breath. Her hands trembled as she brushed aside vines and followed the gash in the earth where the tree had fallen. Beneath it lay an opening. No, a tunnel, jagged and dark, half submerged in muddy water, veins of glowing fungus illuminating the stone like faint constellations. She hesitated. A gust of wind swept behind her, pushing her forward like fate itself refused to let her retreat. Her boots splashed softly as she stepped inside. The air grew colder, the silence thicker. She descended with care, each step echoing off the curving walls. The place smelled ancient, moss, wet rock, and something deeper. Metallic. She gripped the flashlight tighter, its beams slicing through the gloom. At first, it was the sound that made her stop. A breath, massive, slow, rasping like a bellows. Then the chains, a faint rattle of iron drawn taut. Her pulse quickened. The tunnel widened abruptly into a cavern. Water pooled across its floor, mirror still, reflecting jagged stalactites like teeth. And there, in the center, was the impossible. A dragon. Alara stood frozen. It was enormous, wings folded tight against its sides, dark scales shimmering with an oily luster. The creature's head was bowed, resting near a nest of glowing embers. Around its neck and legs coiled heavy iron chains, old but enchanted, faintly glowing with blue runes. Its breath steamed in the chilled air. One eye opened, slitted in gold, locking onto her like the sun itself had turned to stare. Alara didn't scream. She felt the scream rise, sharp, human, instinctive, but it caught in her throat and withered there. The dragon didn't move. It watched her, unblinking, and there was something ancient in that gaze. Something not monstrous. Something mournful. "I'm not here to hurt you," she said, surprised by her own voice. It sounded too small, too young, to matter. The dragon didn't react. Alara stepped forward cautiously. Water lapped around her ankles. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied. Her eyes adjusted more to the gloom, and she could see the detail now. The scarring along the dragon's left flank, the way its wings trembled slightly with each breath, the raw flesh where chains bit deep. Why was it here? Why chained? The nest, it wasn't made of embers. It was protecting something. She drew closer. Nestled in the center was an egg, large as a melon, warm orange and gold. Light seemed to pulse within it, as though it breathed on its own. The dragon's tail curled protectively around it. She took a breath, steadying her nerves. Her mother had drawn dragons in her journal. Not fantasy sketches, anatomical diagrams. Studies. She had written of creatures lost beneath the world, of forgotten guardians bound to ancient tasks. Alara had never known whether it was madness or myth. Until now. "Who did this to you?" she whispered. The dragon blinked slowly. Then it shifted. Chains clanked as it raised its head, not high, not threateningly. It simply looked at her. The egg glowed brighter in its nest. Alara felt the weight of her presence here, the trespass and the inevitability of it. She sat on a flat stone, heart still racing, and pulled the soaked journal from her coat. The pages were warped, but the ink held. She turned to the final entries, sketches of a winged creature in a cavern lit by fungal light. A diagram of a binding rune. A sentence scrawled in her mother's looping hand. "One remains. It guards what we forsook." Alara looked at the dragon. "You've been waiting," she said. "For someone." The silence between them was no longer empty. It was full of memory, pain, time beyond reckoning. And something else. Recognition. The dragon lowered its head again, closer to the egg. Its eye closed. Alara knew then that the world above was still turning, unaware. But down here, something forgotten had begun to stir. The storm had revealed more than just a buried tunnel. It had uncovered a story unfinished, a legacy once broken, and she was now part of it. She stood slowly, tucking the journal beneath her arm. Her legs trembled, not with fear, but with a strange certainty that she didn't yet understand. She would return. She had to. But for tonight, she took one last look, the dragon, the egg, the chains. And she whispered, "You're not alone anymore." Then she turned and walked back through the tunnel, the storm outside no longer a threat, but a herald of the change to come. The rain had stopped by morning, but the sky remained heavy with clouds, as though the storm had only retreated, not vanished. Alara didn't return home that night. She found a dry alcove under an old bridge near the edge of the woods and waited for dawn, curled around her mother's journal like a lifeline. She didn't sleep. Her mind replayed the image of the dragon over and over, the way it had looked at her, not with hunger, but with grief. By midday, she was back at the tunnel's mouth, water still lapping at the edges, but the flow had slowed. She had brought a backpack this time, blankets, dried fruit, a camping lantern, a small medical kit, and a thermos of tea she had stolen from the cupboard. She wasn't sure what dragons ate, but she couldn't walk away. Not now. The dragon was still there, unmoving but unmistakably aware of her return. It watched her with the same unwavering gaze, but there was something different, subtle, but present. A lack of tension in its massive shoulders. A flicker of recognition in its eye. "I brought food," she said, carefully approaching the edge of the cavern's pool. "I don't know if you eat fruit, but it's all I have right now." She placed the offerings gently on a rock near the waterline and stepped back. The dragon didn't move. She wasn't surprised. Chains or not, it was proud. It wouldn't beg. So she sat again and opened the journal. Her fingers traced the lines of a symbol, one that matched the runes glowing along the chains. "If I can figure out what these mean," she said quietly, "I might be able to get you out of here." She visited every day, sometimes twice. She brought herbs, mushrooms, bits of meat when she could sneak it from the pantry. She studied the journal late into the night, redrawing symbols, comparing sketches to the markings in the cave. The dragon began to shift more when she came. It would lift its head. Sometimes, it would turn to follow her movements. She started talking to it, not expecting answers, just releasing the weight she'd carried for too long, about her mother, her loneliness, her unanswered questions. On the 5th day, she sat cross-legged in the shallows, sketching a translation key for the runes on the chains. Her voice was hoarse from reading aloud to herself, but she kept going. The cave felt less cold now. The dragon made a low, guttural sound, neither threatening nor aggressive, more like a distant rumble. Alara looked up. "You're trying to talk to me, aren't you?" she asked, heart leaping. "You understand me." The dragon blinked slowly. Then it moved, dragging one chained foreleg forward with effort and extending it. The claws curled, and with the tip of one, it scratched a single line into the stone floor, a perfect replica of a symbol in her journal. Alara gasped. She scrambled to the page and flipped to the matching drawing. "This one, it means guardian." She looked up. "Is that you?" The dragon dipped its head once, deliberate and slow. Her hands trembled with excitement. "You're not just a prisoner. You were placed here on purpose. To guard something." Her eyes drifted to the glowing egg. "That." The dragon's gaze followed hers. It shifted its body protectively again, wings tightening around the nest. "I think I understand," Alara whispered. The following days became a ritual. She returned with more supplies, set up a small station of notes and pages near the cavern wall, and created a rudimentary bridge of stones so she could walk to the center without soaking herself. The dragon, who she had silently named Kalen, continued to communicate, always with careful claw marks or small gestures. He began drawing shapes beside hers, correcting her interpretations, guiding her toward meanings that transcended simple language. They didn't need words anymore. They had understanding. The runes told a story, not all at once, and never directly, but through fragments that Alara pieced together like broken glass. Kalen had once flown over vast kingdoms. He and others like him were guardians, not of treasure, but of balance. wards against corruption that spread when magic fell into the wrong hands. People once revered them, but power breeds fear, and fear breeds betrayal. A great war had sundered the bond between dragon and human. The others were slain, banished, or bound. Kalen was the last, and he had been chained here, not just to guard the egg, but to protect the world from what lay beneath it. Something old, something angry. The revelation staggered Alara. She had thought freeing Kalen would be the goal, but now she hesitated. What if breaking the chains released more than just a dragon? That night, she lingered longer than usual. The air had grown heavy again, storm winds whispering at the cave mouth. Kalen lay with his wings stretched partially open, a silent invitation. Alara sat beside the egg, feeling its warmth pulse through her fingers. "I don't think this is about me," she murmured. "But I think I was supposed to find you." Kalen's tail tapped the stone beside her gently, a soft thud of agreement. She laughed, only a breath, but it was the first sound of joy she'd made in weeks. Then, without warning, a ripple of motion disturbed the still water. Alara shot to her feet. Kalen growled, low and guttural, a warning born of old instinct. From the shadows at the far edge of the chamber, something stirred, a dark shape retreating into the tunnel. She wasn't alone down here. Her mind raced. Had someone followed her? Had they been watching? She gathered her journal and backed away, Kalen rising behind her with a sound like thunder. His wings beat once, slamming against the air, sending a gust rippling across the chamber. The shadows were still again. But the message was clear. Whatever had been watching, it now knew. As Alara stood at the tunnel entrance, heart hammering, she turned back once more. Kalen was silhouetted in the cavern's light, wings outstretched, the egg nestled safely at his feet. He nodded. She returned the gesture. She would be back. But things were different now. The story was no longer theirs alone. Something else had awakened, and Alara feared it hadn't come in peace. The forest felt less like a sanctuary and more like a trap. Alara moved quickly, ducking under low branches slick with dew, ears straining for the sound of pursuit. Since she saw the figure at the edge of Kalen's chamber, unease had coiled in her chest like smoke. She hadn't told anyone about the tunnel, not friends, not teachers, not the foster family she barely acknowledged. Yet someone had found it, or had always known. She reached the rusted gate behind the abandoned mill and waited, hidden in the brush, watching the old path where moss crept through broken stones. No one came. Only wind, birdsong, and the faint rush of the river in the distance. Still, she felt watched. Back in her room, she spread her notes across the floor. Her journal now bristled with symbols, diagrams, and theories. She had cataloged every rune from the chains, every drawing Kalen etched into the stone. The word for guardian had appeared over a dozen times. But another symbol had emerged repeatedly over the last few days, one she hadn't noticed at first, a circle bisected by 3 jagged lines. Kalen had traced it near the egg, on his own flank, and once, ominously, near the entrance where the dark figure had stood. She flipped open her mother's journal again, to a page she'd ignored for years. A scrawled warning. Not all who bind seek to protect. Some chains were forged to contain, others to claim. The meaning struck her now, sharp and terrible. Kalen hadn't just been bound to guard. He had been hidden, kept from those who would exploit him, or worse, the egg. The tunnel wasn't merely a prison. It was a vault, and someone had found the key. When she returned the next day, she brought salt and sage, an old hunter's trick for warding spirits. It felt foolish, but instinct guided her. The cave was quiet. Kalen stirred as she entered, his body tense. The egg's glow had intensified. Something within it pulsed faster, like a heart sensing danger. "I saw someone," she told him. "They know." He growled, low and furious. The chains glowed faintly in response, reacting to his rising energy. She approached slowly and knelt by the nest. "They'll come back." He lowered his head until his eye was level with hers. Then, with a slow and deliberate motion, he scratched the bisected circle onto the stone once more and tapped it twice. "What does it mean?" she asked, but the answer was already forming in her mind. A name, a group, a force. She dug back through the journal's later pages. Her mother had mentioned an ancient sect, the Thorns of Ire, devotees of control masquerading as protectors. They had existed for centuries, twisting old magic into tools of dominance. If they had found Kalen, the egg wouldn't be safe for long. She stood, heart pounding. I have to move it. Hide it somewhere else. Kalen growled sharply, the sound echoing off the cavern walls like a cannon blast. She stepped back, startled, but his eyes weren't angry. They were afraid. You don't think it's safe to move? He nodded once. Then what do we do? She asked. Wait? Fight. The silence stretched, broken only by the faint hiss of water dripping from the cave's ceiling. Then, slowly, Kalen began to move. He dragged his chained body toward a far wall of the chamber. The water parted as he advanced, revealing an alcove covered in mineral buildup. He struck it once with his claw, and a hidden seam cracked open. A tunnel, shorter, narrower, hidden behind centuries of stone. Alara followed him into the passage, ducking low. The walls were etched with murals, dragons soaring above forests, humans bowing in reverence, and finally, the rise of fire and darkness. At the end of the corridor, Kalen stopped and gestured toward the final carving, a dragon standing beside a girl holding a glowing sphere. The resemblance to her was uncanny. You've seen this before, she said, breathless. My mother, she was here. The dragon dipped his head. She didn't disappear. She came to you. Tears prickled at the corners of Alara's eyes. Pieces of the puzzle clicked into place. Her mother had known the danger, had sought Kalen out, perhaps even delayed the Thorn's pursuit. And when she hadn't returned, it was because she never left. She pressed her hand to the wall, overwhelmed by the weight of it all. When they returned to the chamber, she noticed the egg's light flickering erratically. It was close. Whatever was inside was preparing to emerge. That night, she returned home to find her room disturbed. The window was cracked open. Her backpack, where she kept the marked journal pages, had been rifled through. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was overtly broken. But she knew the feeling of someone moving through her space. She no longer had time. The next morning, the path to the tunnel felt different. Not silent. Still, as if the very air waited. When she reached the cavern, she froze. Kalen wasn't alone. A man stood at the far edge, half shrouded in shadow. Tall, dressed in a coat of black leather and silver fastenings. His hair was ash white, his face lined with age and cruelty. In one hand, he held a curved staff embedded with the bisected circle symbol. His other hand rested casually on the hilt of a thin blade. You're a difficult girl to follow, he said, voice smooth, cultured, but not impossible. Kalen snarled, wings flaring wide. The man didn't flinch. Alara stepped forward. You don't belong here. He smiled. On the contrary, this place, this creature, that egg, they belong to us. You've simply been babysitting something beyond your comprehension. You're with the Thorns. I am the Thorns. He stepped forward. And you, girl, are standing in the way of an inheritance that predates your family's foolish curiosity. She moved in front of Kalen instinctively, shielding the egg. Her fists clenched. You can't take it. I don't intend to take it, he said. I intend to awaken it. The air crackled with tension. Kalen roared, chains straining. The man raised his staff and murmured a single word. The runes on the chains flared brightly, and Kalen collapsed, writhing in agony. No, Alara screamed, running to his side. You think you understand the old magic, the man said, disgusted. You think you've learned the runes. But you've only scratched the surface of what we buried. She looked up, fury burning through her fear. I don't need to know everything. Just enough to stop you. He raised the staff again. But before he could speak, the egg pulsed violently. Light burst outward, knocking the man back. Alara shielded her face as heat and magic surged through the chamber. Kalen lifted his head weakly, eyes wide with awe. The egg cracked. The glow intensified, lighting the cavern like a second sun. And in that light, a new shape began to emerge, small, winged, and blazing with ancient fire. Alara stared, breath caught in her throat. It was beginning. The cavern burned with light as the egg cracked open, its shell falling away in molten shards that hissed against the cold stone. Alara shielded her eyes, barely able to comprehend the shape rising from the brilliance. Wings unfurled, delicate yet formidable, casting shifting shadows on the tunnel walls. The creature that emerged was unlike Kalen, smaller, yes, but suffused with radiant energy that pulsed in time with the dragon's steady breath. It blinked, new to the world, and its eyes found Alara's first. Not Kalen's. not the man in black. Hers. Then everything moved at once. The Thorn's leader recovered from the blast, his cloak torn, a bleeding line across his cheek. He raised the staff again, its embedded runes now blazing a sinister crimson. Kalen growled, dragging himself up despite the pain. The chains sizzled with energy as he strained against them, his body heaving. "Kill the girl," the man hissed. "Take the hatchling. The ritual cannot be delayed." Shadows surged from the tunnel beyond, hooded figures stepping into the light, their eyes glowing faintly with unnatural magic. Alara stumbled back, hands trembling. She had no weapon, no training, nothing but a notebook full of runes and the weight of a promise. The hatchling chirped once, high and sharp, a sound like striking crystal. Kalen responded with a deep, resonant rumble. Something ancient passed between them, unspoken, undeniable. Then Alara moved. She sprinted to Kalen's side, ducking under a lashing spell from one of the figures. The chains were burning against his scales now, responding to the Thorn's incantations. She pressed her palm against the closest rune, whispering the words she had traced again and again in her mother's journal. Unbind. The symbol flared, then dimmed. One chain fell away. Kalen roared. Another figure lunged at her. The hatchling shrieked and released a jet of flame, brief, flickering, but enough to stagger the attacker back. Alara reached for the second chain. She didn't hesitate this time. Unbind. The second rune failed, another link shattering. Kalen stretched his wings fully, the sound like thunder inside the chamber. The Thorn leader shouted something, an ancient word lost to time, and his staff ignited with black flame. "Kill her," he bellowed. Kalen surged forward, breaking the third chain with a forceful twist. The final link remained, the one bound closest to his chest, pulsing like a heartbeat. Alara pressed both hands to it and screamed the command once more. The last chain exploded. Kalen was free. The cavern could barely contain him as he rose to his full height, scales gleaming, wings casting the Thorns into terrified shadow. He turned to Alara, eyes blazing gold. She nodded. Then he attacked. The chamber became a storm of fire and stone. Kalen tore through the cultists with a precision born of centuries of repression. His flames weren't wild. They were purposeful, searing only those who stepped forward with weapons raised. The Thorn leader backed away, eyes wide. He raised his staff to defend himself, but the hatchling darted through the air and struck it with a bolt of concentrated heat. The staff snapped in two. The man screamed. Kalen descended upon him in a blur of wings and fury, pinning him to the ground with a single claw. But he didn't kill him. Not yet. Alara stepped forward, chest heaving. "You knew my mother." The man sneered, blood running down his chin. "She failed. Just like you will." Alara didn't answer with words. She picked up the broken half of his staff and drove it into the runes at the chamber's center, the ones he'd used to amplify the chains. There was a scream, not from the man, but from the magic itself. The air shuddered. The binding spell shattered. The glow faded. Kalen roared in triumph. The cultists, broken and scattered, fled into the tunnel's darkness, their power severed. The Thorn leader, writhing beneath Kalen's claw, stared at Alara with hate so pure it nearly chilled her. "This is only the beginning," he spat. She met his gaze. "Exactly." Kalen crushed him. Silence fell. The hatchling fluttered down and landed beside Alara, nuzzling her hand with a warmth that soothed the adrenaline in her blood. She knelt, pressing her forehead to its scaled brow. "You're safe now," she whispered. Kalen lowered his massive head. The fire in his chest still burned, but it no longer threatened to consume. He had been guardian, prisoner, and now protector again. As they emerged from the tunnel hours later, the forest greeted them with quiet reverence. Dawn had begun to stretch pale gold across the sky. Alara looked back once at the entrance, now sealed behind a shimmer of fading runes. The story was not over. The Thorns would rise again, in another form, in another place. But Kalen was free. The hatchling had chosen her. And her mother's legacy lived not only in memory, but in action. She walked into the light with 2 dragons behind her and fire in her blood. There was still much to learn, but for the first time, she did not walk alone.